I'm very into this idea that you can just chop wood and carry water and keep going and do the best you can.
Hey everyone, on this week's episode, I'm joined by the writer, journalist, and political commentator Molly Jong-Fast. In addition to hosting the podcast Fast Politics, Molly is also a special correspondent for Vanity Fair and a political analyst for MSNBC. Though I think it should be said, we don't really talk politics on the episode. Instead, we focus on her latest book, which is largely why I wanted to have her on the show, the searing, heartbreaking How to Lose Your Mother, a Daughter's Memoir. This is a book that lives up to its provocative title. Molly's mother is Erica Jong, the novelist, satirist, and poet best known for her 1973 novel Fear of Flying, and one of the leading voices of second-wave feminism. In her book, Molly tries to untangle a messy childhood and even, to a certain extent, messy adulthood, overshadowed by her narcissistic, once famous, too often out-of-reach mother. It's also a book about aging and frailty. In 2023, Erica was diagnosed with dementia right around the same time that Molly's husband learned he had a rare cancer. Like Joan Didion's A Year of Magical Thinking, this is a book about an extremely difficult, gut-wrenching year. But it's also much more than that. It's also a book about coming to terms with things through humor, sobriety, grief, therapy, writing, and yes, time. More than anything, it's a book about acceptance, or at least trying to find acceptance. You don't end your bad childhood simply because you want to, Molly writes. You don't get to decide when any of it ends. On this episode, we talk at length about Molly's actual fear of flying, in addition to her mother's book of the same name, her 27 years of sobriety, and how her time in AA has transformed her life, and the importance of confronting the vicissitudes of aging and one's passage through time. Before we get into the episode, I'd first like to thank our Season 11 presenting sponsor, the high jewelry Maison Van Cleef & Arpels, which this year is collaborating with the American Museum of Natural History in New York to present the exhibition Cosmic Splendor, jewelry from the collections of Van Cleef & Arpels, an awe-inspiring assemblage of jewelry creations, timepieces, and precious objects with astronomical references from the Maison's patrimonial collection, as well as from private loans. From dramatic necklaces depicting rockets in flight, to gem-encrusted pendants inspired by distant nebulae, to watches with intricate mechanisms that trace the transit of planetary bodies. Cosmic Splendor features nearly 70 astrological, celestial, and mythological creations that celebrate the wonders and mysteries of the cosmos. Among the enchanting universe of pieces on display are a diamond-studded yellow, gold, and platinum meteor clip from 1951, a yellow, gold, and ruby moon pendant from 1969 that's a celebration of the Apollo 11 moon landing, and a gold, sapphire, and diamond Diana clip depicting the goddess of the moon from 2011. These works trace the stylistic evolution and the level of expertise that this high jewelry maison, founded in Paris's Place Vendôme in 1906, has developed throughout its history. You can purchase admission tickets or learn more about Cosmic Splendor at amnh.org/exhibitions. That's amnh.org/exhibitions. And now, here's my conversation with Molly. Hi, Molly. Welcome to Time Sensitive.
Thank you for having me.
I thought we'd start our conversation today with what we could call flight time.
Right.
So basically how you think about flying. And by this, of course, I mean both fear of flying
and
your
yes.
mother, Erica Jong's landmark feminist book, and your own very much internal fear of flying.
Yes.
Let's start with your mom's book, this totemic thing that had already been in the world for 5 years when you were born.
Yeah.
How do you think about the impact of that book on your mom, on your dad, on your family, on yourself?
So I often think about that book, and I think I talk about this in How to Lose Your Mom, like how there's a school of thought that it ruined her life, and there's a school of thought that it like made her life. She was at the time married to her second husband, a psychoanalyst named Erica Jong, who was Chinese, and they had been married for I think 7 years, actually. When the book came out, she must have been 31. She was around that age. When you look at my mom's life, there are all of these times when she's clearly trying on different identities. And I think she thought she'd be a doctor's wife. During the Vietnam War, they went and lived in Heidelberg, Germany, because Alan was worried that he'd be confused for someone who was Vietnamese and be killed on the front lines. They weren't sending doctors to the front lines, but this idea had captured his imagination. So, I mean, I guess they were sending some doctors to the front lines, but not child psychoanalysts, probably. They lived in Heidelberg, Germany. She did analysis in a different German city. And I think that was a life she sort of tried on. When the book became such a phenomenon, it changed the trajectory of her life. It's funny because people come to me and they'll say, I actually was talking to a friend of mine today who's a really smart reporter for the New York Times. And we were talking about our mothers, because both our mothers are around the same age, and how she was saying that book changed her mother's life, like, and how important it was when she was growing up. And I said that our mothers created a structure for us to exist. And she's more successful than I am. She writes bestsellers. She covers the Trump administration. And I was saying, like, women like us didn't exist before our mothers did things like they did. And our daughters could not exist were it not for us. So, so much of this feminism really is recent. Like the women who can have bank accounts and do the same things as men. I mean, this is like a 50-year proposition.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of coincides with the book almost.
So there are a couple things that happen, like the pill is 1960, then the book comes out in 73, Roe is passed in 73, then they can't get the Equal Rights Amendment passed. It is just a sort of seminal moment for women. And some of it is reversed and some of it is not, like Roe.
There's always the classic, in your parents' shadow, you have to find a way out. But in your case, it was like not just a parent, but this book.
I had my mom, on my other side, my grandfather. So my grandfather had written Spartacus and written April Morning and had written a number of books. He actually, around the time I was born, he was about to write these series of sort of trashy novels called The Immigrants, which were going to be humongously successful. And New York Times bestsellers, all of them, and end up being TV movies. They were sort of not classics, but they made him money, and they were also kept him in the zeitgeist in a weird way. There was always a sense that my grandfather really liked my mother because she was famous. And that even though she was like incredibly dysfunctional and my mother had this epic divorce that went on for decades where they're suing each other. But my grandfather really had a special place in his heart for my mom, despite the fact he was like, helping my dad pay for lawyers, because they both had that magic potion of fame.
Yeah, the glow.
Yeah, and nobody else did. So there was a sense in which they were very much simpatico, despite the fact that my mother and my father did not get along.
I think it's fair to say your mom's mom wanted to be famous. She was a painter.
Right. She definitely wanted to be famous. Yeah. And I think so much of my mother's particular pathology towards parenting came from her mother's feeling that had she not had these children, she could have been Lee Krasner, who is, by the way, someone no one fucking knows. I mean, like, that's the great thing about all these people is like, she could have been Lee Krasner. Who the fuck is Lee Krasner, right? Lee Krasner was married. The most famous thing about Lee Krasner is that she was married to
Jackson
Pollock. And that's pretty much it. But my grandmother, I mean,
her paintings are having a bit of a moment now.
I guess, I still think I would rather have been born. But
You write beautifully about that in the book, this sort of fleeting nature of fame. I'm sure we'll touch on that at multiple points in this interview. But it is interesting that like these people who we revere in the moment, just 10, 20, 30 years later, it's like, who?
Yeah. It's interesting because some people do stay famous, right? Like you could be Anthony Hopkins. Anthony Hopkins has been famous for many, many years, decades. But most people don't stay famous. Most people stay famous for a very short window of time. Part of that is because we get very bored with our famous people. Some of it is because we get angry at our famous people, which is what I saw with my mom, which was a totally fascinating. We make them like gods a little bit, right? They have a sort of magic power, which sometimes gets them elected president twice. But they also have a kind of, because they have this magic power, when they do things that are wrong or even just distasteful, they crumble. And I think, again, this is like this idea of backlash, right? I was rereading Susan Faludi's book, Backlash, which is, if you read it now, you should read it now because you'll be like, holy shit. It was written 20 years ago and it is incredible. In some ways, what's fascinating about it is many of the things she considered to be powerful oppressors do not exist anymore. She writes a lot about women's magazines. I came up through women's magazines. Women's magazines were where I learned to write. She has some pretty harsh words for women's magazines about the way they made women feel, the way they this, that. It's funny because women's magazines are gone. They don't have power anymore. It's over. Like it's a paper tiger. So just really interesting to see how everything has shaped and shifted and changed.
Bringing this back to your new book, How to Lose Your Mother, I was astounded to learn that your birth in this, I think it was a Washington Post piece, was framed as occurring between pages 284 and 285 of your mom's book, Fanny.
Yes. Multitaskers.
Yeah, I mean, this is literally like almost positioning you within the pages of one of her books, and then literally you became the subject of. But
it's funny because I went to visit my mom at the nursing home before this. She's a very glamorous nursing home. Actually, we moved her to a nicer one that I think is nicer now
than the one that's in the book.
Yeah, we moved her to a different one. And I went to visit her because it's near where I was going to read this audiobook. I said, I just don't have a lot of time because I'm doing this and doing that. She's very out of it, but she was like, you're really pushing yourself. And I said, well, I just have a lot of work to do. And she said, I always overexerted myself too. I wish you wouldn't. There's something so dark about dementia, but I knew exactly what she meant. And she knew exactly what I meant. And it was, there's a strange connectedness to it too,
Your mom very often, I guess, as you've pointed out, didn't have a ton of time for you. I think your dad once told you she couldn't even spend 1 hour with you. The most she could do was half an hour.
Yeah. I use that quote because she said she was so obsessed with me and then she couldn't ever spend time with me. So I always worried that it was me. What my dad did was he gave me the perspective to see it wasn't me. And that was super gratifying. But you have to remember, the 1970s and 80s were not the parenting we do today.
Yeah, it's bohemian.
They just didn't give a fuck. I mean, and it wasn't, you weren't supposed to.
Yeah. Helicopter parents?
It was like people were smoking. Yeah. We didn't have car seats. It sounds bad now, but people didn't really start caring about their children until I feel like the late 90s, early 2000s. I could be wrong, but it seems like the vibe.
Tracks.
Yeah. Not a great parent, but also it was a broad legion of bad parenting.
Yeah, and they didn't have the tools from their parents either.
200 years before that, people were having kids to have them work on farms. Not to say that it wasn't traumatic. I'm just saying we recently started valuing parenting as a society,
So going back to flight time, in your new book, you write, obviously, given that my mom wrote Fear of Flying, this all feels
Yes.
a little too on the nose. She wrote Fear of Flying and bequeathed her Fear of Flying to me, and she always, always, always was on an airplane.
It was weird. So, yes, I did have a fear of flying. I think I'm pretty much better. I went to this guy, Marty Seif. So I really did have a bad fear of flying. And it came naturally. I write about it in the book. So my grandfather was an import-exporter, spent all this time flying back and forth to Japan. And first on boats, then on planes. And I think what happened was everyone just got crazy about flying. And maybe it was how it was flying in the 60s, not probably the golden age of aviation. But for whatever reason, everybody was superstitious and crazy about flying. So I have these cousins on my mother's sister's side, including Peter Dow. I've now blocked him on social media, but he was the campaign manager for Jill Stein. Okay. And also for Marianne Williamson. Just basically everyone who I can't take. But anyway, he doesn't fly. So they really did make us completely crazy in that family. So I didn't fly for 10 years. And then my husband was like, you got to get on an airplane. Like, this is very weird. You got to be normal now. And so I was like, all right, I'll be a normal person. Because it is insane to not fly. Like, it's not. And it's one of those things where not flying doesn't make you not scared. It just makes you scared of more stuff. So, like, I wouldn't fly, and then I wouldn't want to go over bridges, and then maybe the train. I didn't want to go on the train. It kind of devolved. So I went to this guy, Dr. Marty Seif, and he got me flying again. It was extremely stressful and horrible. And the first couple of flights I took, I was like, oh my God, this is horrendous. But as I started flying again, it got better and better. And now I'm pretty good.
It's so interesting that your mom's book is called Fear of Flying.
She was terrified of flying. She always was afraid of flying. Even when she was flying all the time, she was still like drinking, taking Valium, doing anything to keep. And I'd be like, you fly every week and somehow you still can't. Because, and this is something I learned in exposure therapy. I don't know how interesting this is, but it's interesting to me. And since it's my podcast now, I'm just kidding. But exposure therapy, the idea is that you have to feel the anxiety but like bodily feel it and walk through it to know you're okay. I did that and found it was great. And if you take Valium, I'm sober since I was 19, so obviously I'm not going to take a Valium. But if you take a Valium or have a scotch, you don't experience the anxiety, so you don't get the exposure. So you just are a little stoned, you fly, and then you're a little stoned. Whereas what happens when you fly and you have this exposure therapy is you feel scared, you fly, you see it's fine. And then next time you fly, you feel scared and you see it's fine. And then next time you fly, you feel maybe a tiny bit less scared. And it works. It just is not that fun and takes a while.
Yeah. In preparing for today's conversation, I listened to an interview your mom did on Studio 360 with Kurt Anderson.
Oh, yeah.
She says in it, I had been schlepped around the world so many times because of that book. And
yes.
I just thought that was so, again, to write a book called Fear of Flying, and then the result of that is that you're literally being...
Except she loved to travel. For example, I was supposed to go somewhere, I think it's the first week of May. I was supposed to go somewhere like a couple days this week. Or last week, I was like, well, I have these kids and I'm going on a book tour in 2 weeks. And I really think I should just stay here and be here for these kids. I just don't think I can do I'm sorry, I can't do it. And it's like, my mom, you couldn't ever fucking, like, be like, I'm going, there was never like sometimes I'll go, sometimes I'll not go. She always went, which, I think she really could not sit in her own skin, which, I respect that.
One other flight reference I wanted to bring up is that you, growing up, spent a lot of time on Pan Am Flight 1.
Unbelievable. I am still obsessed with this flight.
Could you share,
yes.
Tell the listeners
so has captured. Did you know about this?
No, I had no idea.
So I think actually a little bit of it is wrong, but some of my worst memories of it were during the first Gulf War when Pan Am would somehow also fly troops. Everything would be so delayed, and it would be JFK to London, Heathrow to Delhi. And it was the same flight, and it would do 3 stops, or it would do 2 stops. And it may have kept on going. It was sort of a later version of that Pan Am, because Pan Am had started with these flights like in the 50s where they would stop different places. I remember, flying to London back in the 70s, 80s was just chaotic, like really chaotic. And you'd leave late at night. And there would be all these people going to India, and often there would be lots of troops going to wherever. And it just was a super anxiety-provoking late-night thing that we would do. Some of my most unhappy memories are waiting for this late-night Pan Am flight to go to London, and also TWA. These these airlines that no longer exist figure prominently in my childhood, those two, TWA and Pan Am. Yeah.
I just find flight time a fascinating subject, and not only through the fear of flying element, but like the way time shifts when we travel and the sort of liminal nature of what it means to be in an airport. And I found it interesting, too, to learn during the writing of your new book, you listened to Joan Didion's The Year of Magical Thinking on a plane.
So I love Didion, and every time I go to California, I feel like I have to, I have a story for you. That it's a story that I don't think I'll write about it, but I spend a lot of time trying not to write about it. So I had a connection to Quintana, and I wanted to never write about it because the way I knew her was a way that you're not really supposed to say you know people. Despite the fact that she had died of alcoholism, I didn't want to write about it because you really can't write about people you meet.
Through that.
Yeah. And the rehab had connected us, but still it felt really dicey to write about it. I write about being sober. I've been sober 27 years, but I don't like to write about other people getting sober, except my mom, because it's fine. We're at a rapprochement with my mom trying to get sober. But I've been really careful. Like, I'd read Didion. I had known her. I had not known her well, but I had known her a little bit. I had known Quintana well. And I had really been careful, even despite the fact that they were both dead, and Nick is dead, and John Gregory Dunn is dead. Everyone's dead. But I didn't want to touch it. I didn't want to write about it. And I knew Griffin a little bit. I really like him, and his writing is...
Yeah, wrote such a great book.
Yeah, such a great book. So I knew this therapy book was coming out, the therapy notes. And I thought, I probably won't be in that. I'm in it on like page 14 as her AA sponsor.
Oh, wow.
As Quintana's AA sponsor. So I won't write about it because it's not my story. But
it's out there.
It's out there. So I was like so good about keeping that secret for so many years. And then a friend of mine was reading it and sent it to me. And I was like, oh, that's me. God damn it.
Well, how much were you thinking of The Year of Magical Thinking while writing this book?
It was a template.
You really feel it. Like, I'm not saying that there aren't lines that like, there's a bit of it's Didion-esque,
right,
but like it's very you.
Right.
But it's about a horrible year.
Yes, 100%. I come from writing novels, so I really treasure good prose. When prose are good, I am just, first of all, especially because there's not a ton of value put on it in our AI dabbled culture. So, when prose are really good, it's pretty great and pretty unusual. I like to listen to books now. I've started listening to books. I'm dyslexic. So, I didn't start reading until I was maybe in, I don't know, 4th or 5th grade.
You hated reading as a kid, right?
I wasn't a reader. Yeah. And it's funny because I have a daughter who's a writer, and she's a reader, like just a voracious reader. And my husband, who's an academic or was an academic, also a crazy reader. And I'm sort of the lightweight in the family. So I have 2 other kids, one who does classics, but I'm kind of lightweight. So I mostly listen to things just because I'm really an auditory. That's sort of how I process information. So I'll like listen to the whole New York Times or listen to the Washington Post or The Economist. And actually, it works better for me, but it's definitely a better way for me to process information. It's so funny because it's like now I do so many jobs that I am always very cognizant of what it's like to switch between different, like I'll be on television. That's a totally different muscle than
a podcast,
even a podcast, which you would think, podcasts you would think would be the same, but they're not, because the television is like 25 seconds or, a minute. And you can't say things like on a podcast, you can be like, you can caveat things whereas you can't necessarily do that on TV. But yes, writing is totally different. And I'm just very aware of how different these things are.
Hey everyone, taking a quick break here to tell you a little bit about our Season 11 presenting sponsor, the high jewelry Maison Van Cleef & Arpels, which this year is collaborating with the American Museum of Natural History in New York to present the exhibition Cosmic Splendor, jewelry from the collections of Van Cleef & Arpels, an awe-inspiring assemblage of jewelry creations, timepieces, and precious objects with astronomical references. Featuring nearly 70 celestial, mythological, and astrological jewelry creations that celebrate the wonders and mysteries of the cosmos, the exhibition presents an enchanting universe of jewelry from the Maison's patrimonial collection, as well as contemporary creations, some of them on loan from private collections. You can purchase admission tickets or learn more about Cosmic Splendor at amnh.org/exhibitions. That's amnh.org/exhibitions. And now, back to the episode. Well, I did want to bring up television, so that's a good segue. Yeah. In some ways, maybe TV for you is the opposite of the airplane. It's like the thing that has given you some of the most pleasure in life. I mean, you've written that by your early 20s, you'd watch more television than some people watch.
Television.
Yeah,
yes,
yeah. Well, I'm bringing it up in all senses of TV. I mean, you grew up watching it to the point where as I was saying, by your early 20s, you'd watch more TV than some people watch in a lifetime.
Yes.
And some of your favorite memories with your mom were when
watching television.
You would stay up late eating ice cream, watching TV.
Yeah.
And now full circle, TV is this thing that makes you feel so good. Now you're on, but now you're on the other side of the screen.
I do love television. I really do. I think it's really fun. And it's funny because it's it was so, growing up, it was so naughty to watch television. It was like sugar cereals. So when my dad's house, you weren't allowed to watch television if it was light out. That was the rule. And it still feels really subversive to me to watch television. I do it, absolutely. I watch a lot of C-SPAN. Why I love C-SPAN, and they are quite pleased with the fact that I am their biggest evangelist, is because I don't, and I say this as someone who's in the news business, there is a lot of information that is not available when it is edited. And for example, we spend a lot of time on the news talking about politics and not a lot of time talking about Congress. Almost no time talking about Congress. There'll be congressional hearings that no one will have fucking heard can I curse?
Sure.
Anything about.
Yeah.
So I find C-SPAN, and C-SPAN actually has a podcast, which is excellent, which is and you get to really hear, sometimes the right will get mad and say, you cut that out of context. You hear the whole context, it's 10 times worse a lot of times. You'll be like, this is worse. So I really enjoy C-SPAN, and I get a ton of information from it. And there's a certain, being able to just watch a hearing from start to finish without any commentary, and I shouldn't say this because I do commentary, but I'm so aware of what is bias and what is our own bias and what is, when I can just watch some hearing from start to finish or a congressional testimony or, I find it really fun, which is a sad testament to what I consider to be fun.
This is maybe pulling back a little bit, but how do you think about television from a temporal perspective? What is TV time to you?
I like to go on television. I find it really fun going on television. I mean, I really like it. When it's great, it's great. Like when you are doing a hit where you're getting to talk about something really interesting with some interesting people, it can be great. Or when you're, for example, like I was on a couple weeks ago with someone who was just saying something that wasn't right. And I said, I don't think this is right. Like I pushed back on it. And that kind of stuff, when you're in there to be able to defend values that you know are correct, that is amazing. We were arguing about whether or not this administration was going after Harvard because of anti-Semitism or because of authoritarianism. And it is, of course, the latter and not the former. And the former is being used as a cloak for the latter. So I felt really glad that I got to be able to do that kind of thing. Sometimes, and I think this is a problem that the left has sometimes, is like we shouldn't go in spaces that are more mainstream, less left-leaning spaces. And in fact, we should go everywhere. Mm-hmm. We should go on every show. We should go on we should go on Fox News. We should go on Steve Bannon. We should go on every single...
Pete Buttigieg has got that. He's understood that.
Yeah, and even, just go everywhere. Be everywhere. Go on Joe Rogan.
It's interesting you mentioned Joe Rogan because it's not TV, although it's still YouTube is sort of a new form of TV. Mm-hmm. How do you see this line between what you might call the virus of fame and television or media? And I'm asking this also in the context of your new book, which begins with the first sentence, I am the only child of a once famous woman. Yeah. Like your mom definitely had her TV moments for sure.
It's just everything's a lot more siloed. So you'll have things like, for example, people who are famous to certain groups. Like you'll have writer famous, or even I was looking at these photos of these people who are going to be at the Met Gala. Some of these people are very, very famous, but I have no idea who they are. So it's just much more siloed. Fashion people know fashion people, and book people know book people. And I wrote for Vogue. I've written for Vogue during different decades. And there were decades in the 90s where you could write a piece, or even any magazine, Vogue, Vanity Fair, anywhere, where you could write a piece and it might get published and it might not, and it might get killed. And it might get killed right before it was about to be published. There just was a lot more of a barrier to entry. So you could, you could write a piece for the New York Times and everyone in the world would read it. But if you couldn't get in the New York Times, there weren't a lot of other places. You couldn't publish something on your Substack. You couldn't connect with readers just by tweeting.
Right.
There were gatekeepers. There are not the same level of gatekeepers, but there's also not the same level of bang for the buck that there used to be.
And how do you think this is going to shift how we think about fame?
Not to get political here, but there genuinely the fuck up that started all the fuck ups was never regulating technology ever, and just assuming that tech companies would be good actors. There was no reason to assume that tech companies would ever be good actors. There's no evidence to support that. So what happened? Tech companies used content to build bigger tech companies, right? They said, fuck you to everyone who is a content creator in every way. It's like NPR and Exxon, right? Like the government funds Exxon with tax incentives, but NPR, you get like 0.0001% of that. And every penny you get NPR, we're going to punish you for. Look at the UK. They have multiple newspapers. They have, are they as stupid as we are? I think they may be. But the point is they have, so, it's what you nourish in a culture. And it turns out that tech billionaires are not, in fact, benevolent monarchs. They are just shitty human beings like the rest of us. And so now we have a situation where we have like a sort of broad tech oligarchy that is, does not have much interest in the mainstream media because it does not do what they like. And so they're going to build rockets. And all of this could have been prevented had Democrats had any interest in. And again, I say this as someone who is, I was saying this to this Secretary of State I was interviewing and giving her a hard time. I said, I want you to be governor probably as much as you want to be governor. But I just wonder if you guys communicated a little better, people wouldn't turn it off when you guys started talking. So, yeah, I think the media's in a tough spot right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, I don't know, it's interesting, we're talking about different levels of fame, and I think those levels of fame have to also correspond to the time in which that fame took place. Yeah. Because what it meant to be famous in the 60s, 70s was different in the 80s, 90s, different in the 2000s, and certainly different now. We're also talking about a specific type of fame, which is writer fame. Right. Writer fame is its own fucking thing. And I love how you write in the book. You go, being a famous writer is not like being a Kardashian. Yeah. It's not even like being a famous politician. First of all, being a famous writer means that people tend to know your name, but not necessarily your face. Right. This fame usually peaks and ebbs, and the peaks occur with the publication of a book. Yeah. It's true. I'm not convinced that like being a Kardashian is so great for any number of reasons. Namely, they can't go outside. The jewelry mugging in Paris. It's just. And even just like the not being able to walk down the street. I sat down after I did the audiobook things and went and had a burger in the 5-napkin burger in Midtown by myself. Like that's something like Kim Kardashian cannot do. Right. And there's something not terrible about being able to sit in a cafe by yourself and have a burger. I'm not convinced that that's the best. What she has going for her is the best thing. Yeah. So she does have millions of dollars in her own jet. So, Well, how do you think about your own level of fame now that some has come upon you? This is really, I would say, post 2016 as you entered the realm of politics more. I'm excited that I get to write and that people read my writing sometimes. That is, what's nice about being 46 and getting a little tiny bit of notoriety is that when you're 26, and I actually published a book when I was 19 and it did okay, and it sort of got people talking a little teeny bit. When you're 46, you've been unfamous your whole life. It's delightful to get a restaurant reservation. Like it's just a delight, when you email or when you say, is there any way I could I know this is very tight and it's a Saturday night and I'd like to come at 6 because I have to go to sleep at 8. I love a restaurant reservation. I'm delighted. So in that way, it's great, if that makes sense. It's not impacting your life in the Kardashian level. No, it's great. Is it like, the other thing I think that is important to remember is I've been sober 27 years. So I have a pretty organized life. And, I'm not single. I've been married since I was 23. So there's not a ton of deviation that happens. So, this is great, but I sort of have friends already. So I don't have to go out and make my way in the world the way I did when I was young. So it doesn't really change things, if that makes sense. Right. And you've had a chance to grow into yourself in a way where, like, fame was foisted upon your mom. Right. Significantly she really younger. Wanted it too. I don't think it's fair to say, like, none of this. Well, I wanted to ask you this because it's interesting to me. Like, your fame doesn't seem. Yeah, it wasn't like the thirsty kind of, or sort of. It was more like coming out of the shadow of your parent, and I guess turning to your childhood. You had not just a mother, but a grandfather who were these totemic writerly figures. Well, they were and they weren't, right? Like, they weren't the good ones. Like I always say Jacob Bernstein is my friend, and it's like dad was Carl Bernstein, mom is Carl Bernstein, mom is Nora Ephron. Like, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. Like, Nora's like writing Hollywood movies, big celebrity, like famous people speaking at her funeral. My grandfather won the Stalin Peace Prize. He didn't win the Nobel Peace Prize. And my mother, she was
the head of the Authors Guild, but no one else wanted to be. It wasn't like I'm Alice Walker's daughter. I mean, I'm not saying that she's not great. She was so famous for her narcissism that it also did sort of chip away at her literary legacy.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, she was kind of stuck in that first book almost.
I think that's correct. Completely stuck in her first book. And a lot of the stuff written about her sort of first nicely and then less nicely sort of portrays that.
Hey everyone, taking another quick break here to tell you about our weekly newsletter, where I share a behind-the-scenes look into each time-sensitive episode, and where we also get into various things in the cultural sphere our team at The Slowdown is paying attention to. You could sign up and join our 13,000 plus other subscribers by going to slowdown.media/newsletter. That's slowdown.media/newsletter. And now, back to the episode. Well, you write beautifully about what it's like to be kind of perpetually stuck in a bad childhood.
Yeah, which is so interesting. I actually really think, were you trying to ask a question?
No,
Did I
go
interrupt
ahead.
you?
Go ahead.
That was something that has occurred to me, I would say, around late 30s, early 40s, was this idea that like part of the problem was that I just couldn't get out of it. And what happens when you're 46 or when you're somewhere in your mid-40s, you start to realize that, like, you are about to be on the back nine. Maybe you're not on the back nine yet, but all of a sudden, the years of, like, it's going, you're on the other side of it, right? And I remember watching my mother go through this and not doing well with it. You know, this idea that her parents were going to die and then that was it, right? That once they die, you are the next line of people who are heading towards the conveyor belt. And I think for her that was very tough because she couldn't, because of her alcoholism or because of whatever made her so alcoholic, she could not find meaning in her own life. And so she found herself pretty panicked. Now, am I going to be panicked when I'm full on in the midlife crisis? I don't know. I'm not panicked exactly. I'm just sort of, I see where this is heading. Mm-hmm. By the way, it's not heading towards being younger and healthier and happier, in case you're wondering.
Just sticking on the stuck in childhood bit. Therapy is this other thing of your life that I think's been a real consistent, and therapy, your mom was sending you to all these different
child therapists,
shrinks growing up. You were even reading Freud as a kid.
Yeah. But, I haven't been in therapy. I mean, I went to Dr. C for my fear of flying, but I largely have been out of therapy for a couple years. And mostly because I just sort of ran out of material. I just did. And I also felt like, I know what you're going to say. I get it. That's not a value judgment on therapy. It's as much a value judgment on me.
Was writing this book its own form of therapy?
No.
So how do you view...
Wait, I just want to say, we've had, like, there's a lot, that's like a question everyone asks, and you think, and I think therapy is therapy. This book is $26. I am asking you to pay $26. If it's my therapy, you don't have to pay $26. I have to pay you. I think of it as, I want you to read this book because you are a daughter or a son or a mother or a father, and because you know what it's like to have a parent who is slipping away from you, or maybe you never had, and because you know what it's like to try to do all the stuff, to have kids, to have parents, to have a job, and you feel, and to see your own life is slipping away. And that's why I want you to buy this book, because it's $26. There's a lot of money. And even like the audiobook is still like $23. So I mean, I'm just saying, I don't want to complain, and I don't want my editor to get mad at me for saying it's a lot of money, but people are like, oh, this book is really good. And I'm like, yes, because they came to me when I had a platform and were like, you should write a book. One publisher was like, you should write a book about how women can stop Trump. And I was like, that is a terrible idea. And also that is a book that would have aged like milk in the sun. And I was like, I don't want to write a throwaway book. I want to write a real book that you can read 20 years from now. And maybe you won't, but maybe you will.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, I read 2 of your earlier books.
They're not as good.
They're
I'm
not
sorry.
As, no, they're not. They're not.
They're not as good. I know. This book is good.
I mean, you wrote them at a much younger age.
I think they're not as good. I wasn't as mature, and I also didn't. It just wasn't. I got smarter and better. Yeah. I got much better at writing. I wrote a lot.
The writing is exquisite.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, I mean, I had to relearn how to write. I had all these children. Then I went back to writing. I had really good editors. I write a column once a week for Vanity Fair. But for years and years, maybe not years and years, but a couple years, I was writing 3 or 4 pieces a week or 5 pieces a week. I was writing like a piece or 2 for Glamour a week, a piece or 2 for the Daily Beast a week, a piece for the, just endless. And I wrote a column for the Atlantic. So I have just written a lot.
Yeah, I mean, you read your book, Sex Doctors in the Basement.
It's not so good.
And then you read How to Lose Your Mother. It's like, it's a sort of transformative shift as a writer, I feel.
Thank you. Well, no, I think it's true. I mean, I really learned how to write. And I mean, that's the case against publishing books when you're 19 and 22, is that you just don't write as well as you do as you get older. I mean, I also think I did a master's. I learned how, but I really learned by doing. I had this editor at the Daily Beast, Mike Tomasky, who's now the editor of the New Republic. And he was just, he just taught me how to write. He said, this is how you do it. And there are certain things about writing that's mechanical that can be taught. And there are certain things about writing that is spiritual, that cannot be taught. And there's certain things about writing that are just having aesthetic judgment.
Sex Doctors in the Basement, you do get to some pretty core territory stuff, though, that I feel like is worth bringing up. There's a moment where I was really gut punched when you're writing about how you basically turned to drugs, at least on some level, because you wanted to steal back your life from your famous mother. That, like, you wanted a life that was about you, not about her. You didn't want to be a footnote in her life.
That's a real adult child of an alcoholic trope, is where you can't be the star of your own life. There's so much of that sort of bad child of an alcoholic feeling that when you drink or take drugs, you're like, oh, this is why they were so terrible to me. Like, this is the best thing ever. So I think that is for sure true. I wrote so much about getting sober and being sober in my 20s and teens. And then now I've been sober 27 years and I still feel, I go to AA almost as much as I humanly can. And I still feel very connected to being a sober person. And I have a sponsor and I really do the AA stuff. But I'm not as interested in my story because it doesn't matter. Like, I just feel like you can get off the elevator at any point. If you decide to get sober, if you get sober, it doesn't matter. Ultimately, nothing else matters, right? Like, it doesn't matter what you did when you were drinking during the 8 years I was drinking or 7 years I was drinking. It doesn't matter, right? It's irrelevant. If your DNA is coded for drunkenness, it's done.
Yeah. It really also strikes me that it was just 1 month in rehab, November 1997, that did this, that transformed it. I mean, obviously you had a lot more. Yeah. It was a process post, but it does feel like there was this sort of Molly before Hazelden and Molly after Hazelden.
Yeah. I mean, it took a while to get sober. And even though I was a month sober, but I was still kind of a nightmare. Mm-hmm. And getting sober is sort of a process. And you sort of experience it in different ways. And I would say my first year I was pretty crazy. And then I started to get more comfortable in myself. There are some people who get sober and they are a little better off right away. I was not so well off. It took me a little while. I sort of need to be in a hospital. Not in a hospital, but I was still kind of just fatigued.
So you get out of rehab, get married, have kids. You swiftly become
Yeah.
a writer. Eventually, now one that has some fame yourself. I want to turn here to the journey where you went from being like the daughter of to being the actual, Molly Jong-Fast, the quote Joan Rivers for slackers.
I know. Well, that was a long ago bad review from Kirkus. Now I have my own good reviews from Kirkus.
But or New York Times, noting that you have this like weapons grade Twitter habit. Not so much anymore. And now Twitter is called X. But with hindsight and in the time we have left, like how would you describe or how do you view your evolution as a writer, as a media person to where you are today?
I mean, what's nice is that I absolutely know what it's like to be the Jonglet. It's nice to be able to be successful and to have people know who you are. I would argue I haven't won any prizes. I don't have my own television show. Like, can I give you the list of what reasons why I don't feel that I'm actually that successful? I haven't won any prizes. I've never had a bestseller. I don't have a television show. I'm just on a television show, right? So I have all sorts of theories as to why I'm not as famous as why I haven't made it. But it is nice, again, to get the restaurant reservations. Look, if I won a prize or had a bestseller, I would feel more legit. I don't know. Maybe that's bullshit. It's not imposter syndrome. It's like, what's imposter syndrome times a million? What's imposter syndrome on crack? That's what I have. I don't feel like I've made it. But I think like if I could just get a prize, like a National Book Award, if anyone's listening to this, or any kind of prize, or also
it would not shock me if your book ends up on the New York Times bestseller list.
Listen, man, if it does, I will like buy the paper and frame it. And
a little different than the book review your mom framed.
I was like, I kept bringing it. I was like, you understand you're on the cover of the New York, and she just couldn't. Yeah. But I would be delighted. This is the good news about being middle-aged is you are just thrilled when anything happens that is not, something terrible medically.
Yeah. Well, I guess this is maybe a macabre way to end our conversation, but your book ultimately, it's more than just a book about your mom, and it is a heartfelt book. I mean, you're brutally honest about her, but it's also heartfelt. It's also about this like horrific year.
Yeah.
And at its worst moment, your husband gets this cancer diagnosis.
It was so bad.
You write, it was a week that felt like a year, one of those weeks that contained all the scary things you might spend your life worrying about, the things that might never happen. Maybe just share a little bit about that moment and also just how time shifted for you in that knowledge. Which, by the way, you're also dealing with your mother with dementia in a care facility at the same time.
So dark. It's funny because when I was rereading the book, I was like, oh, I remember this so vividly. It's everybody's story. I mean, that's the reason why I wanted to write it, was not because I felt better writing it, was because I know there are a lot of people who go through having these parents and looking at them and just being destroyed over what age has done to them, right? I mean, there's nothing else to blame.
Yeah, you can't stop the march of time.
Right. And that is, so that, I think, what is meant to sort of be it's, they get older, it happens. It's this sort of brutal process of just the body, the flesh, leaving the body. It's just really dark. That was what I was trying to write about. And I think that is the sort of relatable. I feel like you want books to, what I feel like as someone who wrote books in the 90s and then wrote a book now, is that what I wanted, if you were going to buy this book, to feel that I was honest with you, that I didn't, wasn't one of those books where you say, And my greatest accomplishment is my mom used to always say, my greatest accomplishment, my daughter. There is no fucking way she ever believed that. Do I think she was happy she had a daughter? 100%. Do I think that her greatest accomplishment was her daughter? No fucking way. I mean, it's like not even a feminist thing to say, right? I have 3 kids. I adore my kids. Are they my greatest accomplishments? I mean, I don't fucking know. I mean, it's like an insane thing to say. They're not accomplishments. They're people. So I think like you read the book and I have been honest. Like there's no bullshit stuff, which I find when I read a book and you could tell the person is being dishonest, it's just the worst, especially a memoir. So it's honest.
Brutally honest,
right.
I would say.
I hope that there's an opportunity in there to see that the bad feeling you feel about your beloved father or your beloved mother or your not so beloved anyone is normal, and that we are all having that feeling when we're looking at our parents. And I think that is what I wanted to transmit, was that we are all having that feeling, that we are all having that experience of being, all of a sudden on the back nine and being like, oh shit.
Yeah, there's a sort of grief at play, and it's kind of like finding grace in the midst of grief.
Yeah, and you feel the grief about yourself too. I mean, I used to be 26 and I didn't even fucking appreciate it. I look at 26-year-olds now and I am 20 years older than they are, so I could be their mothers. And I am like, your skin is so soft. Like it's, and it goes back, it stretches back. It doesn't just dissolve into nothingness. So be 20, enjoy the skin, the elasticity that your skin has that will not have in 20 years.
Would you say there was something when you wrote the final sentences of this book that you were walking away having like, not necessarily a aha, like, oh my gosh, I just discovered this, but what was your general sentiment or feeling as you kind of like turned the manuscript in?
I thought it was good. I was like, this book is actually good. Now, does that mean anything? No. But I thought, I worked really hard and this book is good. I feel like you get to a point in your life where you just want stuff to be pretty good. When you do stuff, you want it to be good. And sometimes you do stuff and it's not that good. Like, for example, this morning I filed my column. I wrote 400 words before I went to bed. I went and did Morning Joe. And between makeup and the show, I wrote another 500 words. I filed it to my editor at 10 a.m. and I was like, it's not that good. It has the framework to be good. And he was like, no, it's okay. Because there were a couple things where I just had not been specific. For example, I had said Trump on the dolls and pencils, right? Because he said this thing this weekend about dolls and pencils. So when you can get things, when things can be good, it's great. It's really good. So there's a good feeling. I'm very into this idea that you can just chop wood and carry water and keep going and do the best you can. So there's a lot of satisfaction in that, and I felt I got that.
Yeah. Doing whatever's right in front of you the best that you can.
Yeah. I was like, this is good. If nothing else, this is good. So that makes sense. Well, hopefully, not better than my column this week, but you should read it anyway. And especially because this podcast isn't coming out till when?
Yeah, June.
Yeah. So perfect. So read my column. Yeah. Very fair. It'll be good this week.
Hopefully you walk away from this podcast going, that was good.
That was good. It was good enough. She's very limited, but pretty good. Yeah. Somewhat limited, but pretty good.
Thanks, Molly.
Thank you.
Extra thanks to our Season 11 presenting sponsor, the high jewelry maison Van Cleef & Arpels. Since its founding in Paris's Place Vendôme in 1906, Van Cleef & Arpels has developed a distinctive blend of poetry and refinement. With its jewelry and watchmaking collections, the maison is an invitation to a timeless universe of beauty and harmony. You can discover more at vancleefarpels.com. That's VANCLEEFARPELS.com. And thank you for listening. You can find more episodes of Time Sensitive on our website, timesensitive.fm, or wherever you listen to podcasts. To keep up with our latest time-sensitive episodes and get behind-the-scenes updates, sign up for our newsletter at slowdown.media/newsletter. That's slowdown.media/newsletter. You can follow us on Instagram at slowdown.media. Our theme music was composed by Billy Martin. This episode was produced by Ramon Broza, Mimi Hannon, Emily McDonald, Kylie McConville, and Johnny Simon.